The last few hours have been nothing short of an absolute emotional roller coaster that has completely flipped the script on everything we thought we knew about this team. We went from the shock of firing Mike McDaniel on Thursday morning to the absolute stunner of hiring a new general manager by Friday morning. This is the kind of aggressive, decisive action we have been begging for. And if you are not feeling the adrenaline pumping through your veins right now, you need to check your pulse because the Miami Dolphins just made a massive splash. We aren't just bringing in some recycled executive. We are bringing in a heavyweight. The organization has officially hired Jon-Eric Sullivan, the former vice president of player personnel for the Green Bay Packers. And let me tell you, I could not be more fired up about this decision. Before we dive deep into exactly who Sullivan is and why this changes everything for our future, do me a massive favor right now. If you want to stay ahead of every breaking update during this insane offseason, hit that like button, share this video with every Dolphins fan you know, and make sure you are subscribed to the channel so you never miss a beat. Now, let's get into the weeds of this. Can you honestly look at the last 5 years of this franchise and say we prioritized winning over flashiness? Because for a long time, it felt like we were just spinning our wheels. But this move signals a shift. We have been telling you all week that Jon-Eric Sullivan was the top target. We discussed Josh Williams and Chad Alexander as potential finalists. But seeing Miami make such a sound, football-first decision with the future of the organization in flux is a breath of fresh air. There was a legitimate fear that Miami would prioritize hiring a GM just to lure a specific head coach like John Harbaugh. We thought maybe they would pick a buddy of a coach just to secure a big name. But they didn't. They prioritized making the right hire for the front office, independent of the coaching search. They picked the best football mind available. Jon-Eric Sullivan was my number one guy. And he was the number one guy for a lot of people who actually understand how successful franchises are built. If you aren't familiar with the name Jon-Eric Sullivan, let me paint the picture for you. You see this guy? He is 50 years old, and he has spent over 20 years grinding in the Green Bay Packers front office. He didn't just show up yesterday. He learned under the legendary executive Ron Wolf. If you know anything about NFL history, you know that the Ron Wolf way is the gold standard. There is a very specific, disciplined way that Wolf and the Packers build their teams and their culture. We have seen it be successful in Green Bay for nearly 30 or 40 years. Think about it. They transitioned from one legendary quarterback to another, from Favre to Rodgers to Love, staying consistent amongst the top teams in the NFC for decades. How do they do it? They don't do it by winning the offseason headlines in March. They do it because they build through the draft. They build through the trenches. They identify talent that fits a system, not just talent that looks good on a poster. Sullivan is someone who has been highly thought of in league circles amongst executives for years. He interviewed for all 4 general manager vacancies last season: the Titans, Jets, Raiders, and Jaguars. Obviously, he didn't land those jobs, and I know some of you might be thinking, well, if he got turned down 4 times, is he really that good? Do not let that worry you for a second. Look at those organizations. With the exception of the Jaguars, who arguably hit on their hire with Ball Key, seeing their turnaround, the others are organizations known for making poor decisions. The fact that dysfunctional teams passed on him might actually be the biggest endorsement of his competence. He is the right guy for the job because he has seen sustained success. In his 20-plus year career in Green Bay, starting way back in 2003, he has done it all. He was a scout for nearly a decade, covering the Central Plains, then the Southeast, and eventually becoming the director of the Packers college scouting system. This is exactly what Miami prioritized, and frankly, it is exactly what we needed. We knew right from the jump that Miami was looking for a GM with a strong scouting background. Yes, Chris Grier had a scouting background, but let's be brutally honest with ourselves here. Did he find enough success in the draft to justify the tenure? Specifically, look at the last 4 or 5 years. Grier had a couple of solid drafts back in 2017 and 2018, sure. But 2022, 2023, 2024, the lack of depth and impact players coming from those classes has been painful. It has been the anchor dragging this team down. Hopefully, that cycle of mediocrity changes instantly, with Jon-Eric Sullivan stepping into that role for the Miami Dolphins. So, I have to ask you, and I want you to really think about this before you answer in the comments below, what is the one specific area of the roster you think Sullivan needs to fix immediately to save this team? For me, the reaction to this hire is pure elation. I'm not going to stand here and scream at the top of my lungs, but the excitement is real. It is a grounded excitement because this feels like a grown-up hire. It feels like we are finally trying to be the Green Bay Packers of the AFC rather than the circus we have been. You are going to hear me say this a lot when referring to Jon-Eric Sullivan, but it truly is about his mindset and the Packers' way of building the right system and the right culture inside your locker room. If we want to be honest here, and we always keep it real, the biggest issue in the Miami Dolphins organization hasn't just been who is playing quarterback or who the GM is or who the head coach is. It hasn't been one singular person. Has that played a factor? Absolutely. But you want to know what the real issue is in Miami? You want to know the reason why we haven't won a playoff game in 25 years? It is the ultimate culture. It is a culture of softness, a culture of flash, a culture that crumbles when the lights get bright and the weather gets cold. That is going to change with Jon-Eric Sullivan. I truly believe that because he comes from a place where winning is the expectation, not the hope. Listen to this philosophy he shared back in 2022 when discussing team building. It tells you everything you need to know. He said, "I've always been taught the draft is your lifeblood. You build through the draft. It's a young man's game. You want to make sure you're acquiring young, talented players that fit your culture. And then I think you supplement that through free agency." He went on to say that you always have to be assessing your quarterback situation, making sure you have a trigger man you can win with, and identifying core players who fit the culture. He believes you have to do everything within your possibility to retain those players to have sustained success over time. Dolphins fans, if you don't listen to that quote and get absolutely fired up, I need you to check your pulse again. This is the antithesis of the all-in, trade all our picks for superstars mentality that has left us with a top-heavy roster and zero depth. This is the right man for the job. I truly believe Miami is going to start valuing the draft again. We have 5 picks right now in the top 100, 3 third-rounders, 1 first, and 1 second-round pick. I wouldn't be shocked if we ultimately add more by trading players away. We will see if they deal players to accumulate capital. We have to look at the massive contracts of guys like Tyreek Hill and Bradley Chubb. Are those contracts likely going to be off the books for Miami sooner rather than later? It is a possibility. And then there is the quarterback. Sullivan mentioned constantly assessing the trigger man. Tua has a long road ahead of him to turn around this organization. But now he has a GM who understands that the roster around him needs to be built properly, not just bought in a shopping spree. But now, because the GM domino has fallen, we have to turn our attention to the next massive question mark. We will mention it briefly today and talk more about it in depth as the days go on and the head coaching search ramps up, but the landscape has shifted. We initially labeled John Harbaugh and Jesse Minter as the top 2 guys. Do I think Miami will still be interested in both of those candidates? Absolutely. They are elite coaches. But when you had Chad Alexander interviewing for the GM role, a guy who worked with Harbaugh for 10+ years and currently works with Minter, you naturally assumed those two were the package deal. However, with Jon-Eric Sullivan coming aboard, you now have to really think about his connections across the NFL. The network is different now. Obviously, he is working with Jeff Hafley currently, the Packers' defensive coordinator. Hafley was the former Boston College head coach for 4 years and has had the Packers playing as a top 10 defense in the league during his time there. You have to consider that connection. Then you think about Mike McCarthy, who was the Packers head coach for a decade plus with Sullivan in that building. There is a deep history there. There are going to be a lot of connections Sullivan has across the league that we maybe didn't prioritize before. He also has a connection with the Jaguars' defensive coordinator and former Dolphins coach, Anthony Campanile. Sullivan knows what a good coaching staff looks like because he has watched it in Green Bay for 20 years. This brings me to the most important interaction of the day. I want to hear your voice on this because the speculation is about to run wild. Who do you think will be the next Dolphins head coach now that Sullivan is the general manager? Do you think it's still Harbaugh, or does this open the door for a guy like Jeff Hafley? Let me know your thoughts right now in the comments. I really am excited about where we are headed. We all wanted John Harbaugh. He was the dream candidate for most of us. But I am extremely thrilled, and honestly, relieved, that Stephen Ross and this ownership group prioritized finding the right man for the GM job first. They might have liked Chad Alexander. They might have liked the prospect of him bringing Harbaugh to Miami easily. But they put the easy choice to the side and ultimately said, Jon-Eric Sullivan is the best candidate to run our football operations. They decided that he is the right man for the job, and whoever is our next head coach will be the right head coach, not just a package deal. We aren't hiring a GM with the hopes of getting a good coach. We are hiring the right GM first, and then finding the right head coach after that. That is the correct process. That is how winning organizations operate. Before we wrap up, I have to share this fascinating report from Diana Rossini. She tweeted out that Troy Aikman was Jon-Eric Sullivan's biggest supporter entering this process. Think about that. Troy Aikman, the Hall of Famer, the broadcaster, a guy who knows football inside and out, was the only person in this search committee who wasn't already collecting a paycheck from the Dolphins. You had Stephen Ross, Tom Garfinkel, the internal executives, and Dan Marino, who were all part of the Dolphins machinery. But Aikman was the outsider looking in, the objective voice. And Miami ultimately hired the guy coming from the Green Bay organization who was endorsed the most by Troy Aikman. That speaks volumes. It tells me that the organization went outside of its comfort zone and listened to a football guy who knows what a championship standard looks like. Hopefully, Jon-Eric Sullivan ultimately is the right hire, and hopefully, bringing Troy Aikman into this GM search process was the catalyst we needed to break this curse. This looks like the next GM of the Miami Dolphins, hopefully for the next 10 years plus, at a bare minimum. We are tired of the carousel. We are tired of the reboots. We want stability, and we want a dynasty. I am very excited about that, and we will see where the head coach search takes us. It is going to be a wild week, and we are going to be covering every single interview, every rumor, and every breaking update. That is why you need to keep it locked right here. I appreciate every single one of you for watching today. The future is looking brighter than it has in a long time. Stay tuned.